Dorothy had never seen anything like the twisted yellow brick road before. It wound through a dark, foreboding forest, its path illuminated only by the occasional flash of lightning. She clutched Toto close to her chest and shuddered, wondering what kind of place she had stumbled upon. As she walked, the trees around her seemed to come alive, their branches reaching out to her like gnarled fingers. A chill ran down her spine, and she quickened her pace. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning struck a nearby tree, illuminating the path ahead. Dorothy gasped in horror as she saw a group of strange creatures emerge from the shadows. They were small and misshapen, with twisted limbs and jagged teeth. They scurried towards her, their beady eyes gleaming in the darkness. Dorothy stumbled backwards, tripping over a gnarled root. Toto barked in alarm as the creatures closed in on them, their claws scratching at her dress. Just as all hope seemed lost, a figure appeared out of the darkness. It was a woman, dressed in flowing robes and wielding a staff. The creatures recoiled in fear as she approached, her eyes blazing with an otherworldly light.
"Stay back!"
she commanded, her voice ringing out like a bell.
"These children are under my protection."
The creatures hissed and spat, but eventually retreated back into the shadows. Dorothy stared in awe at the woman, unsure whether to thank her or run away.
"Who are you?"
she asked tentatively. The woman smiled, but there was no warmth in her eyes.
"I am the Witch of the West,"
she said.
"And you, my dear, are in grave danger."
Dorothy felt a chill run down her spine at the witch's words. She knew she was far from home, and everything she had seen so far had only confirmed her worst fears. The twisted yellow brick road, the strange creatures, and now this mysterious woman warning her of danger.
"What do you mean, danger?"
Dorothy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Witch of the West's expression grew even more severe.
"You are not in Kansas anymore, my child,"
she said.
"This land is ruled by a cruel and wicked sorcerer known as the Wizard of Oz. He will stop at nothing to maintain his power, and anyone who opposes him risks their very lives."
Dorothy felt a lump form in her throat.
"But I didn't come here to oppose anyone,"
she said.
"I just want to go home."
The Witch of the West regarded her for a moment, as if sizing her up.
"Very well,"
she said finally.
"I will help you. But first, we must make a detour."
Dorothy had no choice but to follow the witch deeper into the forest, her heart pounding with every step. The trees grew denser and the air grew colder, until they finally arrived at a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a large stone altar, surrounded by candles and strange symbols. The witch began to chant, her voice rising in a crescendo that sent shivers down Dorothy's spine. As the last syllable echoed through the air, a dark figure appeared before them. He was tall and menacing, with eyes that glowed like embers.
"Who dares to summon me?"
he growled. The witch stepped forward, undaunted.
"I am the Witch of the West,"
she said.
"and I have come to bargain."
The figure regarded her with interest.
"What do you want?"
The witch's voice was low and steady.
"I seek the aid of the Wicked One,"
she said.
"The Wizard of Oz has taken a young girl from her home, and I need your help to retrieve her."
The figure chuckled, a sound that made the hairs on the back of Dorothy's neck stand up.
"You expect me to help you? And why should I trust you?"
The witch produced a small vial from within her robes.
"Because I have something you want,"
she said.
"This is the potion of eternal life. With it, you will never age or die. But you must agree to help me first."
The figure regarded the vial with interest.
"Very well.
He said finally.
I will help you. But be warned, the Wizard of Oz is not easily defeated."
Dorothy's heart was racing as they left the clearing and continued down the twisted yellow brick road. She had no idea what kind of danger lay ahead, but she knew she was in good hands with the Witch of the West. As they walked, the witch filled Dorothy in on the history of the land of Ounce. She told her about the 4 witches who had once ruled the land in peace until the arrival of the wizard. The wizard had seized power and banished the witches to the far corners of Ounce, where they could no longer challenge his rule.
And now, he has taken another victim.
The witch said, her eyes narrowing.
A young girl like yourself, who dared to oppose him. But we will not let him win. We will fight to the death if we must.
Dorothy felt a surge of courage at the witch's words. She had never been one to back down from a challenge, and now she felt like she was part of something much bigger than herself. As they walked, they encountered more strange creatures, giant spiders with glowing red eyes, winged monkeys with razor-sharp talons, and even a pack of wolves with fur as black as coal. But each time, the Witch of the West stepped forward, her staff glowing with an otherworldly light. She drove the creatures back with ease, never once breaking a sweat. At last, they came to a great stone fortress, guarded by fierce soldiers with gleaming swords. Dorothy's heart sank as she saw the imposing structure, but the witch simply strode forward, her head held high.
I demand an audience with the Wizard of Oz,
she declared, her voice echoing off the stone walls. The guards sneered at her.
You have no business here.
One of them spat.
Leave now, or suffer the consequences.
But the witch was not deterred. She raised her staff, and a bolt of lightning shot out, striking the guard in the chest. He crumpled to the ground, smoke rising from his charred body. The other guards looked on in horror, and for a moment, Dorothy thought they might attack. But then, to her surprise, they parted, allowing the witch and Dorothy to pass. They entered the fortress, the door slamming shut behind them. Dorothy felt like she had just stepped into a nightmare, and she had no idea what horrors lay ahead. The Witch of the West led Dorothy through a maze of corridors, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. Dorothy felt like they were walking deeper and deeper into a maze, and she had no idea how they would ever find their way out. At last, they arrived at a pair of ornate double doors. The witch pushed them open, revealing a chamber so opulent that Dorothy's jaw dropped. The walls were lined with gold, and glittering jewels sparkled from every surface. In the center of the room stood a throne, upon which sat the Wizard of Ounce himself. He was a small man, with a round face and a bald head. But despite his unassuming appearance, Dorothy could sense a cold, calculating energy emanating from him.
Who dares to disturb me?
He boomed, his voice filling the room. The Witch of the West stepped forward, her staff held at the ready.
I am the Witch of the West,
she said.
And I have come to claim what is mine.
The wizard laughed, a sound that made Dorothy's skin crawl.
And what is it that you seek?
The witch's voice was low and dangerous.
I seek the young girl you have taken from her home,
she said.
And I will stop at nothing to get her back.
The wizard's expression grew cold.
You are a fool if you think you can challenge me,
he said.
I have power beyond your wildest dreams.
But the witch was undaunted. She raised her staff, and a bolt of lightning shot out, striking the wizard in the chest. He howled in pain, but before he could retaliate, the witch began to chant. Dorothy watched in awe as the room filled with an otherworldly energy. The walls shook, and the jewels glittered even brighter. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. The wizard lay sprawled on the ground, his body writhing in pain. The witch approached him, a look of triumph on her face.
You will release the girl,
she said.
And you will never lay a hand on her again.
The wizard nodded weakly, and with a wave of the witch's staff, Dorothy felt herself being lifted into the air. She soared through the chamber, past the glittering jewels, and out of the fortress. When she landed back on the yellow brick road, she was surrounded by the witch's followers. They cheered and clapped, and Dorothy felt like she had never been more alive. But even as she celebrated, she knew that she was still a long way from home. She had survived the horrors of Anne's, but the journey ahead would be even more treacherous. Dorothy walked down the yellow brick road, her mind spinning with thoughts of the horrors she had witnessed in the witch's fortress. She had never seen such powerful magic before, and she wondered if there was anything in Anne's that could stop the witch. As she walked, she began to notice that the landscape around her had changed. The grass was no longer green, but a sickly yellow color. The trees were black and twisted, and the air was thick with fog. Dorothy felt a chill run down her spine. This place was like nothing she had ever seen before, and she had a feeling that it was not a safe place to be. Suddenly, she heard a rustling in the bushes. She stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to calm herself, telling herself that it was probably just a small animal. But as the rustling grew louder, she realized that it was something much bigger. A figure stepped out of the bushes, and Dorothy gasped in horror. It was a tall, gaunt man with long, bony fingers and a face like a skull. He wore a tattered black cloak, and his eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. The man beckoned to Dorothy with a skeletal hand, and she felt a strange compulsion to follow him. She tried to resist, but her feet began to move of their own accord. She followed the man through the twisted forest, her mind filled with a sense of dread. She knew that something was terribly wrong, but she couldn't seem to shake the feeling that she was being led towards something even more sinister. At last, they came to a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a large tree, its trunk as thick as a house. The man pointed to the tree, and Dorothy realized with horror that it was covered in faces. The faces were twisted in agony, their eyes staring out blankly. Dorothy felt a surge of terror as she realized that these were the faces of people who had been lost in the forest. The man turned to Dorothy, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light.
You have trespassed in the haunted forest,
He said.
and now you must pay the price.
Dorothy tried to run, but her feet were rooted to the spot. She watched in horror as the man raised his arms, and the faces on the tree began to twist and contort. She screamed as the faces began to melt and fuse together, forming a grotesque monster. It had too many limbs and too many eyes, and it lumbered towards her with a hunger that made her blood run cold. Dorothy tried to fight back, but the monster was too strong. She felt its slimy tentacles wrap around her, and she knew that she was doomed. But just as she was about to give up hope, a bright light shone out from her pocket. It was the ruby slippers, and they were glowing with an otherworldly energy. Dorothy reached into her pocket, and as she touched the slippers, she felt a surge of power flow through her. She raised her hand, and a bolt of lightning shot out, striking the monster. The creature screamed and writhed, but Dorothy stood her ground. She channeled all of her fear and anger into a blast of pure energy, and with a final roar, the monster disintegrated into dust. Dorothy stood there, panting and trembling. She had never felt so alive, and yet so terrified. She knew that she had survived the haunted forest, but she had a feeling that her journey was far from over. Dorothy continued on her journey, her heart racing with adrenaline. She had never felt so alive, and yet so scared. The haunted forest had been a nightmare, and she was relieved to leave it behind. As she walked, she began to notice that the landscape was changing once again. The trees were no longer black and twisted, but tall and green. The grass was no longer yellow, but a bright shade of emerald. In the distance, she could see a city, its spires reaching up towards the sky. She knew that it was the Emerald City, and she felt a surge of hope. She quickened her pace, eager to reach the city and find the wizard. She knew that he was her only hope of defeating the witch, and she prayed that he would be able to help her. As she approached the city, she could see that it was even more beautiful than she had imagined. The buildings were made of glittering green emeralds, and the streets were paved with sparkling jewels. But as she drew closer, she realized that something was wrong. The streets were deserted, and the buildings were dark and empty. There was no sign of life anywhere. Dorothy felt a sense of unease wash over her. This was not what she had expected. She had thought that the city would be a refuge, a place of safety in the midst of the chaos of ants. But as she walked through the empty streets, she realized that something terrible had happened. The city was abandoned, and she was all alone. She wandered through the city, searching for any sign of life. She called out, but her voice echoed back to her unanswered. She began to feel a sense of despair wash over her. Was this the end of her journey? Had she come all this way for nothing? Suddenly, she heard a sound. It was a faint whisper, a voice coming from somewhere deep within the city. She followed the sound, her heart pounding with hope. She came to a large building, its doors covered in gold and precious stones. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was dark, but she could see a faint glow coming from the far end of the room. She walked towards the glow, her heart beating faster with each step. As she drew closer, she could see that the glow was coming from a throne. And sitting on the throne was a figure, his face hidden in shadow.
Dorothy,
said the figure.
I have been expecting you.
Dorothy felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew that this was the wizard, but she couldn't see his face.
What happened to the city?
She asked. The wizard sighed.
The witch has taken everything from me,
he said.
My power, my followers, my city. I am nothing now but a shadow of my former self.
Dorothy felt a surge of anger rise up within her. She knew that the witch had to be stopped, no matter what the cost.
I need your help,
she said.
I need to defeat the witch, and I can't do it alone.
The wizard leaned forward.
I can help you,
he said.
But you must bring me the witch's broomstick. It is the source of her power, and without it she is vulnerable.
Dorothy nodded, her mind racing with plans. She knew that this would not be easy, but she was determined to do whatever it took to defeat the witch. She turned and walked out of the throne room, her mind focused on her mission. She had come too far to fail now, and she would soldier on. Dorothy left the Emerald City and headed towards the witch's castle, determined to find the broomstick and bring it back to the wizard. As she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her stomach. The castle was just ahead, looming in the distance like a dark shadow. She approached the castle gates, her heart racing with fear. She pushed them open and stepped inside. The castle was dark and silent, but she could feel eyes watching her from the shadows. She walked cautiously through the halls, her hand on the hilt of her sword. She came to a large room and gasped in horror at what she saw. The witch was there, her back turned to Dorothy. She was standing over a cauldron, stirring something dark and sinister. Dorothy raised her sword, ready to strike. But before she could move, the witch turned around, a wicked smile on her face.
Well,
said the witch.
Look who's come to pay me a visit. Dorothy, my dear, I've been expecting you.
Dorothy gritted her teeth, ready for a fight.
I've come for your broomstick,
she said. The witch laughed.
You think you can defeat me?
she said.
I am more powerful than you can possibly imagine. And soon, all of Oz will bow down to me.
Dorothy lunged forward, her sword flashing in the dim light. The witch dodged her attack and sent a bolt of dark energy hurtling towards Dorothy. Dorothy jumped out of the way, narrowly avoiding the blast. She swung her sword again, but the witch was too quick for her. They continued to fight, each one trying to gain the upper hand. Dorothy was fast and agile, but the witch was powerful and experienced. Finally, after what felt like hours of fighting, Dorothy saw her chance. The witch was distracted for a moment, and Dorothy struck. She plunged her sword into the witch's chest and watched as she crumpled to the ground. Dorothy gasped for breath, her heart racing with adrenaline. She had done it. She had defeated the witch. She walked over to the cauldron and saw that it was filled with a dark, bubbling liquid. She knew that this was the source of the witch's power, and she destroyed it with a flick of her wrist. She searched the room and found the broomstick hidden in a corner. She picked it up and felt a surge of power coursing through her body. She knew that she had to hurry back to the wizard before it was too late. She left the castle and ran as fast as she could towards the Emerald City. As she ran, she felt the ground shaking beneath her feet. She knew that she was running out of time. She had to reach the wizard before it was too late. She burst into the throne room and held out the broomstick. The wizard took the broomstick and held it up to the light.
Yes!
He said,
This is it! With this, we can defeat the witch once and for all!
Dorothy felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had saved Ants. But as she looked at the wizard, she realized that there was something strange about him. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she knew that something was wrong. And then she saw it. The glint of the witch's magic in his eerie eyes. Dorothy saw the glint of the witch's magic in the wizard's eyes. She gasped, realizing the truth.
You've been the witch all along!
The wizard laughed, a cruel, mocking sound.
Very good, Dorothy,
He said.
You figured it out. But it's too late now. With the power of the broomstick, I am unstoppable.
Dorothy felt a surge of anger and betrayal.
How could you do this?
She demanded.
How could you betray us like this?
The witch wizard shrugged.
It's simple, really. Power. That's all that matters in this world. And with the broomstick, I have more power than I ever dreamed possible.
Dorothy raised her sword, ready to fight.
I won't let you get away with this,
She said. The witch wizard laughed.
You can try, my dear. But you'll never defeat me.
They charged towards each other, swords clashing. The witch wizard was powerful, but Dorothy was determined. She fought with all her might, dodging and striking, trying to find a weakness in her opponent's defense. Finally, after what felt like hours, Dorothy saw her chance. The witch wizard was distracted for a moment, and Dorothy struck. She plunged her sword into the witch wizard's chest and watched as he crumpled to the ground. Dorothy collapsed, exhausted but victorious. She had saved Ants from the clutches of the witch wizard, and she had proven herself to be a true hero. As she lay there, catching her breath, she heard a voice behind her.
Dorothy?
She turned around and saw her friend standing there, looking at her with concern.
Toto!
She cried, hugging her faithful companion.
You're all right.
The Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion all rushed to her side, helping her to her feet.
You did it, Dorothy! You saved Oz!
Said the Scarecrow. Dorothy smiled, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment.
Yes,
She said,
we did it. Together.
and with that, they all walked towards the horizon, ready for their next adventure.